Sandy, hold on, Sandy, you want to join the meeting first?
Okay.
It's that green button right at the top, left hand. There you go.
All right, so let's call the meeting to order. And we've got roll call officially logged in, except for me. Do you have an extra agenda? Thanks. All right, so second item of business is approval of the March 5th, 2019 agenda, which we all have, now that I have one. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
All right, you have a motion and a sec. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any additions to the agenda that anybody wants to add? Otherwise, no? All right. So otherwise, no additions. We'll move forward. So we have the next item on the agenda: approval of the January 17, 2019 minutes of the Green Bay Housing Authority.
I'll make that motion, too.
Okay. And is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additions, corrections, or modifications to those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes from January 17, 2019, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item D, item number 1 under that, review and possible action regarding presentation by Donald Bernhardt with Baker Tilly regarding rental assistance demonstration.
So you may recall at a prior meeting, we had brought up the topic of going through what we call RAD. And there were a lot of questions that came up as a result of that. I actually was at a presentation that was put on by Baker Tilly and Don Bernard's. So they actually came up today from Madison. They are developers that work with this program a lot. And they're going to give us kind of a presentation and an explanation of the program. And with that, I will turn that over to Don and Caitlin.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much
Yes.
for everyone's time today. And we definitely have an overview of this program, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. It's been around since around 2012, but we open for many questions as well, right? There's a lot of this is new to people. There's probably a lot of questions, but it's we'll go through some details, some examples and so forth, but we'll kind of dig in. So very good. Kind of maybe it's the bottom right hand is page 4 on the slides. Kind of what's the overall issue and why even RAD? You know, obviously public housing, a lot of the public housing projects were built, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? And we know there's dollars coming, your capital funds and so forth, but it's hard. And even your best efforts is hard to keep up with maintenance. We all kind of know that. HUD actually did a study. They hired a consultant to do a study, kind of extrapolate it, and they saw $26 billion of maintenance that was kind of behind schedule on their whole public housing portfolio. Around 1.3 million units of public housing around the country. And HUD said, how do we address this issue? Kind of the next slide, the problem. HUD is losing 10 to 15,000 units a year of public housing just because of dilapidated units and so forth. And so, again, back to how do they, the current system, not quite working, right? They can't keep up with deferred maintenance and so forth. So really, what it came about was RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, RAD for short. And it was a demonstration. It's been around now since 2012, so almost 6-7 years. We'll get into some numbers and what's being done with it. And right away, HUD said back in 2012, we're gonna let's do this. Maybe on a somewhat competitive basis, that the first 60,000 units of public housing across the country can apply to kind of go through this program. And at first it wasn't as 60,000 units across the country did not apply. People were like a little skeptical. It's a new HUD program. Things come and go. What is this all about? But over time, 2012, 2013, there was some momentum. People started to learn more about this program and what it could mean and what are the pros and cons and the benefits. And you can kind of see, it's kind of the slide 7, the bottom of the page. You can kind of see that over time, HUD has said, we want to make sure this is proven out, that this is doing what we thought it could do. And we'll raise the number of units that can apply from 60,000 to 185,000. in 2017 up to 225,000, most recently in 2018 up to 445,000 units across the country. And again, the whole portfolio is about 1.3 million units of public housing. So about a third of that has the ability to apply. I think the latest numbers we saw were maybe not quite 400,000 units had applied for RAD. So there still is space. What kind of had happened in these years, you know, when the cap was only 60,000, if you were the 60,000 and first unit, you were actually on a waiting list. And until HUD raised that cap, you didn't know when you could proceed. So right now, where we sit, there's actually room of maybe 40,000 or so more units that can apply under the current cap. You know, I think HUD is seeing the results that they were hoping to see, and there's this ongoing discussion that maybe HUD will say, hey, there's no cap. You can, any unit can come in, that can come in, but right now there is this cap that we need to be aware of as you kind of think about timing and things of that nature.
When you mean cap, you mean
Yes.
cap on how much they can spend per unit?
Well, just, no, I'm sorry,
No.
just how many units can you even apply to actually go through
Oh,
this
cap
conversion
for the
program?
actual
The actual
amount
number
of
of units that
units.
can
Okay,
be
all right.
applied. These numbers are, you know, a few months old, but kind of as of last summer, about 88,000 units of public housing or 826 properties had actually gone through and converted under this RAD program. And you can see on that, over $5 billion of construction dollars have been spent on the program, or almost $60,000 per unit. Some of that's new construction, some of that's renovation of existing projects. So you can see kind of a staggering statistic. It would have taken 46 years to accumulate enough capital funds, 46 years to get, you know, that $5.6 billion. So it kind of just shows most of these use a combination of debt and tax credits and so forth. So what a lot of these projects are using, which we'll get into, you know, in a little bit. So that's just kind of those first few slides are just some background. It's been around, like I said, 6-7 years. It has been utilized by 826 properties. So it's, you know, so it's really no longer a demonstration. I think it's kind of been working through the system and so forth. And we'll kind of switch into a little bit about really, you know, what is this? You know, we've heard a lot about it. Really, what is the program? So really, in its simplest form, you know, obviously right now the public housing, you as the public housing agency, obviously tenants are paying a portion of their income. That doesn't change. There's no change to the tenant paid portion. What they pay today, if there's a flat rent, there's a little bit of a nuance. I'm not sure if you have any flat rent or anything like that. And so there's a nuance we can discuss later about that. But essentially, if someone's paying 30% of the rent today, they'll pay 30% of the rent under the RAD program. It's really how the HUD rental subsidy comes to you. Right now, you're obviously getting kind of your ACC, your kind of operating expense reimbursement, and you're getting your capital funds. Kind of there's this kind of bar chart, if you will, that says, again, the tenant paid portion is exactly the same. But now, what happens is, right now you're kind of under Section 9, right? It's HUD Section 9. You actually now fall under, if you convert through RAD, is under the Section 8 program. And you know, many other private sector, there's Section 8 properties, project-based. So really this, all your funds from capital funds and ACC operating subsidy now will be one Section 8 contract. So we can, and Katie will get into this in a second, we already know what your rents would be under the Section 8 contract. And you will now then lock into a 20-year, it's called a project-based, I mean, essentially project-based rental assistance or project-based rental contract. And one of the benefits, I think maybe one of the questions, you know, how does RAD compare to what we have today? What are some of the benefits? And a lot of people are looking at conversion because of the certainty of future funding levels. As you know better than anybody, your funding levels are probably a little bit like a roller coaster. You submit a budget, well, I'm going to fund 92% of your budget, or 89. You know, it's this roller coaster. So you have, and how can you run a business, quite frankly, with you don't even know what your sources of you know revenue are going to be and so forth. So when you're able to lock into this 20-year Section 8 contract, you actually will get rent increases based on what's called OCAF, or the operating cost adjustment factor. You're familiar with that. And probably historically that's been somewhere in the 2 to 3% range. Obviously there's no guarantee in the future, but historically it's been 2 to 3%. So a lot of housing authorities are looking at, okay, if I'm at 2 or 3%, I know my base rent today I know I'm gonna be 2 or 3%, so maybe a steady, kind of slight incline in my growth of rent, as opposed to this roller coaster of rents. It's really that certainty of future funding levels is what I think a lot of people look at as a pro or a positive of the program.
So we would have to make that application for project-based vouchers. Our county housing authority administers that program, so we would just basically apply for those project-based vouchers, or is it an automatic when you go?
Essentially, yeah, kind of the nice thing, it's you're not taking any, voucher authority out of the county, anything of that
Okay.
nature. It's really kind of converting your existing public housing subsidy
Okay.
to essentially a brand-new contract that really doesn't exist today.
Okay,
So it's not taking from them, it's just kind of converting over.
so we're not removing 150 units
Exactly.
out of that pool?
No,
Okay,
exactly.
that's good.
Yeah, so that's really good, yeah.
Question on 20 years.
Yes,
So we would get into a 20-year contract as an advocate for people with disabilities or always advocating for everything from transportation, housing, whatever.
right.
And you always see cuts in Section 8 funding coming down. So would that 20 years guarantee that we would get that, or we could be one of the people that are cut from that funding? Same with any other HUD funding, but we've
Right.
been very fortunate to be able to get one because we're smaller.
Right.
But you hear, we get stuff from the Housing Trust Fund, we get
Yeah.
stuff from our independent living, our national independent living, and we see a lot where it's usually units, it's not vouchers as much
Right.
sometimes, but we've always had a good
Right.
voucher amount here.
Yeah.
But that's what we would be worried. So have you had
Yeah.
anybody that has been doing this, have been
Right.
into a cut type position
Yeah.
where they've lost some of their units and their vouchers for those units?
Right. Fortunately, I'd say the answer is no, and I'll get into a few, specifics. So how many units? 159 units? How many units are you at for the?
154 for Mason Manor.
154, yeah.
So
So-
not scattered sites, we would just do?
No, it would not be
Okay.
scattered sites, that
Okay.
just,
Yeah.
just Mason Manor.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so what would happen, you would essentially get, this rental assistance contract for 154 units, for Mason Manor. And that would be this 20-year contract. And that's again, what's subject to these operating cost adjustment factor rent increases. And so, again, like we talked about, it's not like taking vouchers or anything of that
Correct,
nature. And it's a 20-year, obviously the RAD program's only been around since 2012, so we haven't had to renew anything. But we can look at the private sector where Section 8's been around for, 30 plus years. The nice thing is, Section 8 contracts haven't been pulled away from properties. There's a history, a 30-year history in the private sector of
Right.
Section 8. So I think the industry feels pretty comfortable that you've got the contract, what happens in 20 years, it is subject to renewal and appropriations and so forth. But I think a positive in the Section 8 history is that we haven't seen like HUD saying we're taking your contract back. In the
Okay.
history.
Or you can only have half of your contract.
Right, exactly,
versus-
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
That would be the concern. And the other
Yeah.
thing is, let's say that it did happen.
Yeah,
Down the road,
Yeah.
we've had not a great increase in HUD over the years. So that did happen, would we be able to go to a subsidized, back to our section, did you call it
Section 9, public housing. No, I mean, once you convert,
So once you convert, you're done?
you're done with public housing.
Alright.
Yep.
And, oh, sorry,
Yeah.
one other thing, are those considered portable then?
They
Those
are,
vouchers?
they're not.
Okay, good, that was the
Yeah.
other thing,
Yeah.
because then people could take that voucher out.
Yeah, these are tied to the project.
Tied to the unit, because, yeah, normally you can put your vouchers,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I have a question. So this, when it converts to Section 8, how does that impact the tenants?
Yeah, yeah. Again, just from the base, the nice thing is, again, from purely their tenants out of pocket, there's literally zero change, in out of pocket dollars. If someone's paying 30% of their income today, they pay 30% of their income, post-RAD conversion. There is a phase out of the flat rent that we probably can follow up on some specifics on flat rent, maybe a little different.
Well, and a follow-up to that is, do the tenants then have to apply to be eligible for Section 8?
No, essentially, there's no kind of the right of return. No, no, it's No,
It's the same, so they
it's the
just
same.
stay the same, it's just how
Yeah.
the rent is being funded or
Exactly.
subsidized
Yeah,
is different.
yeah.
Okay.
Some internally, for the paperwork is a little bit different, it's a 505-9 versus the 8, or, yeah, so it's different paperwork on the housing authority side, but for qualifications, you have the right to
And I
return.
think Stephanie probably knows where I'm going with this. You may not know this, well, you know that the county has a Section 8 program through their housing authority. We have the Section 9. I am the person that prosecutes the Section 8 housing fraud violations for the county. And I guess the question I have is that I'm fairly familiar with the rules and requirements for Section 8 and to be able to maintain your eligibility for it. And I guess the concern I would have is that, are those rules then applicable to our current tenants? And would those rules potentially disenfranchise some tenants if they had violations that were precluded under Section 8? So I don't know the Section 9 requirements.
They're the same.
The same.
I
They're the
was
same.
gonna say, I think they're the exact same.
Yeah.
We're talking like maybe past criminal history or something like that.
Some of those things,
Yeah.
yes.
Same
Yeah.
rules.
So
Same
say
rules.
we do 5 years for background checks, criminal
Okay.
and rental. So we do rental that Section 8 doesn't do. And then annually, we still do conduct their background check like the Section 8 program does too, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's,
that should not
yeah,
jump in.
exactly.
Tenants would not
Yeah.
lose their housing as a result.
And their reviews would be very similar, would be the same,
Yeah.
right?
We think
Every
that
year?
would be, like, we don't prosecute for, like, if somebody had another tenant and we just evict now,
Mhm.
whereas with the Section 8 program, we prosecute. So that might be a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes, because
For
they,
fraud.
for fraud, it's considered fraud because they received payments that were not due them. So it's categorized as fraud and we prosecute.
And it is a really big thing, I mean, you know, a lot of tenant rights advocates, that was a big concern. Can I switch and have a reason to maybe, but no, it's the right to return to your, stay in your unit is a huge right under this program, just because I'm switching, I'm not reevaluating. I mean, if they're under Section 9, they'll be under Section 8.
What about the eligible or unauthorized household member issue? Does that come up in this situation?
We have,
Very.
I mean, we have Langen, we're contracted with Langen as well.
Okay.
So I would say, once they're on our program, like, they still have to follow the rules and regulations of our lease and house rules and,
Which
Yeah.
means no be over
Continue
2
to use-
weeks or something like that,
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. And I think Section 8 is like,
yep, very similar. They
Very
use
similar.
contractor.
Very similar, yeah.
Are there, but very similar is not the same as the same. So are there any differences between the Section 9 and the Section 8 in terms of tenant eligibility?
Well, we do rental checks that
Right.
Section 8 doesn't do.
Okay.
So we're looking at rental history to see if they would be compatible in our units that I know Section 8 doesn't do. They're just looking at criminal.
Okay, so-
And we, in Section 8, our local Section 8 office does 3 years misdemeanor, 5 years felony, where we're straight 5 years for felony and misdemeanor.
Okay, so would you continue to do the rental checks then?
I think that's what if we're allowed
Yeah.
to do, absolutely. I think that helps us significantly to see if they're a compatible tenant for us.
Okay.
Did you still have a question?
Yeah, I was just
Well,
curious.
before we do that, let's, just from a processing standpoint, you'd like to open?
Did you want to?
Well, yes, I do, but the question is, do we do it now?
Or at the
Or
end?
do we do it at the end? Because I don't want to keep going back and forth to.
Open and close.
Open and close,
Okay.
open and close, so we will
Is that
allow
all
you.
right? Can you write it down?
I already wrote the question.
Okay, so
Got me.
you'll get a chance, we'll open up the floor at the end.
Thank
But
you.
we'll kind of keep the thing
Perfect.
flowing with just questions from the board here first, and then we'll open it up later.
Perfect.
All right, so, anybody else have any questions at this point? All right, so,
Thank
So
you.
yeah, the next slide shows what the current RAD rents are for Mason Manor. So every 2 years, HUD publishes.
That's number 10, your slide number 10.
Yeah, slide number 10.
Yeah.
Every 2 years, HUD publishes the RAD rents. And so they came out with the 2018 RAD rents, which are based on the 2018 operating fund and capital fund levels. And this, the rent amounts that I've listed here are the 2018 RAD rents plus the 2019 OCAP adjustment, which is 3% for 2019 for Wisconsin. So here you can see you can get $520 for a 1-bedroom and $691 for a 2-bedroom. I think a little bit later I have the rents as well for the scattered site properties, but we can get into that then. I don't know, we're trying to get it.
Sure, yeah, so, and really, that kind of, slide 11 really looks like, okay, back to the YRAD, right? So, yeah, you know, one
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We have 2 different sizes of 1-bedroom units. So would the 380 and 480 square feet bedrooms have the same rental amount?
Yes, they would. Yep. That's a good
Because you don't know
question.
what it'll be after, if you do a whole
Right.
construction
Mhm.
anyway, that may change.
Right. So again, you know, back to, you know, YRAD, we talked a little bit about maybe the certainty of future funding. But a second benefit is easier access to what I'll say capital, which means kind of debt, maybe if it's tax credit equity, sources of funding to maybe renovate units, right? That's really this is kind of done in conjunction. And Caitlin's gonna get into the actual process of the steps of conversion. A lot of it is you need a financing plan. If I want to convert to RAD, I actually need a financing plan, and part of that financing plan, you must include what's called a capital needs study or physical needs study, which is looking at your building, Mason Manor, and you know how's the roof, how are doors and windows, how is the heating and cooling systems, you know, all those types of things. And before HUD would allow you even to convert to RAD, they want to know that you're going to be able to address these physical needs. So that's a really big component of a RAD conversion, is addressing a plan to address physical needs. And that's where, and a lot of times, obviously, those rehab needs get to be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a unit. That's many times where local housing tax credits, you know, kind of come into play. And we'll touch on that here in a little bit. So really kind of slide number 12 really says, okay, I kind of go out, it kind of looks at, do I need financing? What type of financing do we need to maybe think about? And it kind of looks at, you know, people got a lot of dollars during the stimulus days during the last recession and redid elevators and heating and cooling systems, and maybe it's in pretty good shape. Yeah. And you might be able to convert with very little dollars needed, right? And maybe I don't need to take out debt. And it kind of goes along the chain where maybe I have $5,000 or $10,000 a door on average of rehab. Maybe I can just go down to Associated Bank and get a bank loan. To maybe I need $20,000 or you know, do I need $50,000? And that's when we start talking about looking at low-income housing tax credits. And you know, if you're probably $30,000 and more, 30, 40, 50, 60,000, that's definitely something you're going to really have to consider, you know, tax credits as part of the financing plan, which we can, you know, touch on a little bit. Can maybe talk about slide 13?
Yeah, so I took the operating information on Mason Manor and just kind of put it into a model with 9% tax credits. And so that's what this slide is about here. So the top section is showing all of the uses. So that includes, I just estimated doing about $40,000 of rehab per unit. And then you have a number of financing costs for a construction loan and a permanent loan, carrying some interest. And then you can see there's a line item for soft costs and reserves. So this would include things like architect fees, your capital needs assessment, legal fees, I guess we don't really have marketing fees, relocation costs, things like that, as well as a replacement reserve and operating reserve. And then that last line there is a developer fee. And so within the low-income housing tax credit program, the developer of the project, and if that's the housing authority, can earn a fee for doing all of the work of rehabbing the building. So you can see that that amount is listed there. So then that comes out to about $9.8 million project. So how are you going to finance all of those costs? So Don mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program, which is administered by WIDA. And you can see the fourth line there is the LIHTC equity. So basically you would, you have a number of costs associated with doing the rehab, and there's costs that are eligible. and those costs get determined into the amount of credit that you're eligible for. And we reach out to an investor who would then invest in the project by providing equity in exchange for those tax credits as a reduction on their taxes. So it's a great way to get a lot of free money essentially into the project. But you can see that that's only $7.9 million of a $9.8 million project, so it's not enough. So there are other sources of funds to fill that gap, the first of which is taking on debt. So after getting out of the public housing program as a housing authority, you can now take on debt. And with the rents that you have coming in, I estimated you could support about $200,000 in debt. And then the next two lines are soft sources of funds that are available in Wisconsin to these types of projects. So the first one is Affordable Housing Funds, AHP, which comes from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. That is a competitive application program every June. Then there's also home funds through the Department of Administration, and actually maybe Green Bay has their own home funds that we could look into as well. And so then the final item to close the gap is listed as deferred developer fee of about $300,000. So, we have all these other sources of funds coming in. You still got that little bit of gap. And so what that is, it defers your earned developer fee of $1 million that I've listed up here, and it spreads it out up to over a 15-year period. So you would get paid back your deferred fee through your cash flow.
So you do the developer work yourself and then you defer that payment for your staff to do it over the next 15 years?
Yes, yeah. I mean, like, you as a developer would earn the fee, and you're deferring about $300,000 of it, which would then get realized through remaining cash flow after paying expenses and your debt service. So that's.
Yeah, that's good. No, I was gonna say, kind of really big, next slide, Keel's gonna get into kind of timing of the RAD conversion, but it's kind of really big picture. If you apply for these, just thinking even in your decision-making process, right? The next time you can apply for these tax credits will be December of 2019. So you got some time if that's, how you work through your decision process. And, but RAD, and again, Kate, we'll talk about this in a second, then you probably wanted to, if RAD was the way you wanted to move, apply probably sometime this summer. And they'll turn to Keelan talking about the RAD conversion a little bit process.
Yeah.
The next slide.
So slide.
Can you,
Yes.
Put it on a little bit.
who owns the property?
So, yep, that's a great question. So what would happen is actually you, the housing authority, what the typical structure is, you still maintain, hold the land. It will actually do a land lease, but you will actually sell kind of the improvements or the actual buildings into a new partnership. Because the partnership is structured because, as Caitlin said, the $7.9 million is actually equity that is coming from, Associated Bank is actually a big buyer of tax, US Bank, that is actually coming in exchange for these tax credits. So they need to be a partner in the structure for a 15-year period. Then,
Is the housing authority a partner?
yes,
Okay.
so you have a housing authority, and we can talk about, we'll talk about roles of the housing authority, but yes, so housing authority will definitely be part of what's called a managing member. So
Okay.
it's interesting, this is investor, even though they're putting all this money in on paper, they have the money in the deal, day-to-day basis, they're not in your business at all.
Right.
They want reporting, they want to make sure you're leasing to qualified tenants, that it's maintained well, things like that. But at the end, and they're not in it for any cash, they literally, they get these tax credits, and you've heard of depreciation, tax losses, they get tax losses. That's all they want is tax motivated for them. And there's some social motivation, of course, too. But really, day-to-day, it's you who are here and managing it and making decisions. If there's large expenditures, $15,000, $20,000, you might need to get approval, things like that. But normally, on a month-to-month, basis, they don't really have any.
Can the property be sold out from underneath the GBHA?
They cannot, no.
The building itself?
No, not.
There'd be no situation where the housing authority would lose control of the building itself, even though we had the land.
Right, so what happens, and so you'll get, as part of this partnership, you'll get a, 150-page partnership agreement. But part of that is, and because of your status as a housing authority, you have, it's under the tax code, and we can show you all that, you have the right to buy the property back. So there's this 15-year compliance period that the investor will be in. what happens at the end of 15 years is you can take it back for essentially $1, is right in the code, $1. Plus if there's any existing debt on the property, you'll assume the debt. And if the investor had any, what are called exit taxes, which you shouldn't have any exit taxes, you essentially get the property back for assuming the debt. And it's
Okay.
right in the code. And that's very, we know that's a very important key.
Okay.
That's for any nonprofit or housing authority.
So that's where I kind of got lost. You were saying we own the building, or own the.
Apartment, the land on the land.
But we own the property or the land, and I'm assuming the building's on it, and then we sell it?
You actually.
So then we don't own it?
The actual building is typically, you actually sell the physical building. You'll keep a land lease.
Okay.
Right, the land lease. And for this 15 years though, the building is actually part of now this new partnership that you are the managing member of. And then after 15 years, the investor has no motivation after, because all their tax credits are gone. So there's no motivation for them. Plus under the code, it'll be in this partnership agreement, you buy it back for assuming the debt plus $1. And that's tried and true for nonprofits, the tax code, like, low-income housing tax credits have been around since 1986, so 30 plus years. And that's been part of the code that a nonprofit or housing can buy back the property for $1 plus debt.
Okay, so the RAD process, we've got this little flow chart here. So Don talked about capital needs assessment. That's what's in the first part of the due diligence, is just kind of getting a feel for, how much in rehab that you're looking for. And then it's preparing the application, and when the application first came out, it asked for a ton of information, and now it's like, I think, 2 pages. It asks for how many units that you have that are going to convert, and a few other pieces of information, but you don't have to have all of your financing and stuff figured out at time of application. But you do have to have have held tenant meetings and sent out a general information notice as well as a resident information notice. And as part of the application, they do want to see a sample of the notices that you sent out. And then you also need a board resolution showing that you guys are in approval of submitting a RAD application. Then once you submit the RAD application, HUD reviews it. I've seen it take as long as 10 months when they were still under the cap and waiting on the waiting list, to as short as 3 months just this past year. And so then once RAD has approved, they issue what's called a CHAP. It's a commitment to enter into a housing assistance payment. And that CHAP is like usually a 3-page document, and it lists out what your rents are and your unit configuration. Once you have that piece of paper, then you can start moving through the financing plan, which John mentioned. And so that plan is probably like 25 to 30 different items that you put together from a number of HUD forms from the FHEO about your unit configurations. It also includes a relocation plan, so how are you going to move tenants while you're doing work. One of the big things too is an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. They need copies of your capital needs assessments. They need an environmental review. And then they also want, which we have listed here, they need to see that RAD is listed in your 5-year annual plan. And if it's not, you have to do a significant amendment to that plan and go through that process as well. So the financing plan, depending on how quickly things can get assembled, can take anywhere from 60 to 90 to 120 days, just depending on how quickly things move. And then once you submit that plan, it usually takes HUD about 60 days to review it, come back to you with any questions. And once they approve of it, then they will issue what's called an RCC, which is the RAD conversion commitment. And that is actually the piece of paper that says, okay, we've approved of this, we're getting ready to enter into a Section 8 contract with you. Here's another list of 30 or so documents that we need, which are mostly legal documents. So documents showing your ground lease, there's some RAD forms. Usually the attorney that you hire will be handling most of that. And then once you submit that to HUD, usually within 30 days, then you'll close on the project and actually can start doing the rehab. So that's, I mean, it's, can be a drawn-out process, but I mean, I've worked with a lot of really good HUD people that respond and get back to you with answers to any questions, and they're really good about reviewing documents and things like that.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Who helps, do us internally fill out the application, or do we have like a developer or a legal
Yeah.
fill out the application?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times that's, you know what, that's the type of service we definitely
Okay.
can help you with or guide you through. So a lot of it's, you can do it, but we can guide you. Or someone like us, doesn't have to be us, of course, but, so yeah, because you haven't done it before, so how would you know what to do? So,
Mhm.
and there's checklists, but there's, you know, it's new, so, yeah.
I have a weird question, particular to the CAP
Yeah.
needs assessment. So I've seen in other communities that, you know, some communities have just done full remodels of the existing structure the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we may have some needs that we may need to build out. I know for sure we need a generator and some other things that we need
Yeah.
to do additions to, which will definitely need architectural plans.
Yes,
To figure kind of that out.
yeah,
Where does that come into play? Because capital needs is just going
Right.
to go through and
right.
tell you, okay, roof, but we may want to
Yeah.
change the layout, for example, and provide some more tenant features.
Right.
Sure.
Where does that come into play? Is that something we do before we actually do the cap needs, or?
Really, what I would do is really work in conjunction with your capital needs provider, because, you know,
Okay.
like you said, it's, the capital needs is, you know, what, to maintain the existing kind of building stock,
Mhm,
but
right.
you can add to it kind of these types of things, new generator, other tenant areas, things like that.
So we actually work with like an architectural firm then?
Right,
to
and
do
a
those
lot,
cap needs
and a lot of times,
assessments, or-
yeah, and it's kind of, we kind of have to balance, like, there's, the HUD process needs very specific, you know, forms.
Right.
But then if you pursue tax credits, you know, the WIDA actually has an approved list. We want to make
Mhm.
sure you're not spending more money than you need to.
Correct,
So we can kind
correct.
of help you, but right, a lot of those firms are architect type firms that
Okay,
can do it.
that can help with
But
that.
yeah, so we want to make sure it's efficient, you're not
It'd be
doing one
nice
thing
if
for
we could
HUD, one for
do
WIDA.
some added features for the
Exactly.
tenants in this building. 'cause It's
Exactly.
very dated, and,
Sure.
you know, I've seen some of the things other communities have done. I mean, it's not, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not talking glamour, but, you know,
Right.
just some nice features. for
Exactly.
tenants.
No, that makes sense, because this is right, this is your one chance, you know, if you can get, you know, $8 million of tax credit equity, you want to do as much as you can, because
Right.
this is for the next 15, 20,
Exactly,
30,
exactly.
30 years kind of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So with like the application, do we submit that to our local field office, our public housing, or do we go to the SAC office, or when do we switch to like multifamily, or?
Yeah, yeah.
It's now an online application through the RAD Resource Desk.
Okay.
So I don't believe it's the SAC office.
See, actually the RAD, kind of
Yeah, they
multifamily,
created their own.
RBC, yep,
Yep.
kind of their own little,
Used to just email it in to them, but now I believe everything's online,
yeah.
which is very nice.
So in your flow chart,
Mhm.
when are you actually committed to the second last step? I mean, how far can you get into this before you pull out?
I mean, you
Yeah.
could, I guess, pull out at any time, really, but you might lose some,
Yeah, you just, right, spend some dollars and time
Mhm.
along the way, but
I
yeah,
mean,
really.
we need to do most of this diligence anyway, right? So,
Cap needs assessment.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the really easy thing is, like Kaylin said, the RAD application is 2 pages,
Right.
and you don't even need to have that study done at that time. So we love many things to encourage you, if it's something you think you're gonna move forward to, you know, we would encourage you to do that this spring or summer, because
To hold the units at least.
at least to have your chap, to get a chap in your hand.
Line?
You can
Okay.
turn back your chap at any time. There's
Okay.
absolutely no cost, anything like that, to turn back your chap. And then obviously, once you get further, you start
Mhm.
spending legal or consulting or
Once you start
architect.
paying the lawyers.
But the architects are
Those
super
150
early on
pages,
that.
they don't want to-
Also remember, we're like headless nails. Once you put them in, you can't get them out.
So I would just, to piggyback on that, so, you know, Don mentioned with tax credits, so WIDA is kind of very letter of the law, and if you do not have a CHAP, they're gonna say, what are your rents currently right now? And as public housing, you can't take on any debt. So it changes the application process for them, and it might make it a little bit more difficult to get a LIHTC allocation versus going into WIDA, having your CHAP with that proof, like, here are my new RAD rents, and I can take on debt. It's just, it makes
Yeah.
it a little bit easier.
Are we competing, for those WIDA tax credits, are we competing with just other developments across the state? Or is there a separate WIDA allocation for RAD?
Yeah, it won't be for RAD, but 20% of the WIDA's credits go to what WIDA calls preservation projects. So essentially projects with rental subsidy.
Okay.
So it could be privately owned Section 8 projects, other public housing authorities, rural development has some,
Okay.
so.
This is very competitive, I know that there are good
Yeah.
projects that have not gotten those WIDA
Yeah,
tax credits.
exactly, and it can go, it kind of ebbs and flows, so again, it's 20% of the credits. 2 years ago, it was, maybe there were 2 or 2+ applications for one awarded. This round, I think there are only 7 applications and probably 6 will be awarded, but next year it could bounce back, so that's, you
So you
try to
go
put your
through,
best
so
foot
basically,
forward.
that's why this process may take years,
Sure.
because you have to apply for those, if you don't get those credits that year,
You
you
might
can apply
do
again the
again.
next year.
And the one little caveat that's actually pretty new to Wisconsin, so we were talking about, the 9%, which has been really the big powerful. About a year and a half ago, through the state legislation here in Wisconsin, there's a 4% credit, which, just math 4 versus 9, the 9 is much more powerful. But the state added a state 4% credit essentially. So it's not quite 4 + 4 = 8, it's
Right.
like 4 + 3. But it's getting there. And so the interesting thing is, the 9% are due in December. The 4% with the state credits are due in January. And the numbers might be, could be close, since you could actually get 2 kind of opportunities to compete. And the numbers would be probably
Okay.
fairly close. You'd have to have a lot of analysis, but so that's a positive.
Okay.
So you're saying that we would look at doing our due diligence, doing an application, and then the CHAP, get all that in hand before we'd even consider going to WIDA and testing the.
Yeah, I think as Don mentioned, you
waters.
probably don't even have to get a CNA right now. I mean, you probably, as Cheryl mentioned, already kind of have a sense of some things that you want to do and maybe how much it even costs. But it would probably make sense to submit that application, just because it's 2 pages. I mean, the upfront work is really having the tenant meetings and getting the board resolution. And then waiting from HUD to get your CHAP. As Don said, you can always hand the CHAP back, no penalty or any issues.
That's what I was just gonna ask, so
Yeah.
is there a time frame for all of this? So like, okay, you got your CHAP, you've got 10 months to get it in order and put it in and apply and get the financing and, before
So
then it
there are
expires.
some, I mean, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some rules in terms of timing, but HUD says, if you're going the 9% route, you just need to apply the next available time that you can apply. So then, and then once you hear back and say you get an award, then HUD says, okay, now we're looking at like 120 days to submit your financing
Gotcha.
plan.
Okay.
If you're going, Don mentioned the 4% route, that same thing if it's competitive. If you're going a 4% route without state credits, then HUD has some limitations about when to apply and things like that. But yeah, otherwise with the 9%, there's no concern about missing a deadline or anything.
And because I missed that part, plugging my meter.
No worries.
So is the 9%, that's where we're looking at WIDA and possibly other funding sources for the, WIDA would be the tax credits, right?
Yeah. So like on one, I think on slide like 13, page 7,
Correct.
with like the sources and uses, so we have some other soft sources of funds with the HP funds from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago and home funds as an example of other ways that you could fill the gap.
So then Federal Home Loan Bank has also funding that we can apply for?
Yep.
So these would be a lot of, and then the LIHTC, that equity one, that would be WIDA?
Yeah, that's the credits, yeah.
Okay. And then Department of Administration Home Funds?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Or potentially from Green Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they might, is Green Bay, it could be a
Yeah, we're a home-
participating
yeah, they're a
jurisdiction, so.
Yeah.
So yeah, but, so like Federal Home Loan Bank has their own application process that you can't apply to until you have a LIHTC award. So you
Okay.
start with that step and then move to the next step and things like that.
Okay.
Can you tell me how, is the housing authority, do we get to staff it? Do we choose the staff and keep our staff?
Yeah,
Or do
I
we
mean,
lose-
that's-
Do we lose any control with how we run?
That's a
this?
great,
Segue.
a great segue to kind of slide 15 is really, what is your role in the process? And obviously, you're right, kind of getting towards ongoing management. Many times, right, that's a very important component for the housing authorities to maintain management. And a lot of times you're able to do it kind of, you know, as they are. Sometimes they might need a little oversight or hire maybe the first time, especially, right? Tax credits, like we talked about, compliance is pretty similar, but just a little nuance. So maybe you need just a compliance consultant for the first year or two, things like that. So, but many times housing authorities have been able to maintain the management. And that kind of gets to even, I think there's a comment here on the development process. Do you want to be the developer yourself? Or do you want to find you know, a for-profit or nonprofit who does this for a day-to-day job to kind of help you through the process? And part of that is, you know, do you have internal capacity and so forth? Obviously, a firm like ours can help augment capacity. That's what we do a lot. But part of it is, right, and even, are you comfortable working with a general contractor and an architect, right? That's probably something you don't do every day. And things like that. And then even getting to, we haven't really touched on this, but, you know, obviously there's developer fees, and you don't really need to put any, you know, real money in, but there are financial guarantees you have to make to, you know, the investor is putting in $8 million, they want to make sure that you're gonna run the property well, and what happens if there's vacancies for some reason and your bills are piling up, are you gonna cover the bill? So there's those types of guarantees, and sometimes if you, housing authorities might say, I don't, guarantees, I don't wanna make guarantees, so I might be willing to give up a percentage or, depending on that developer fee. We say, it's, the developer fee could be, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million. I might give up some of that to a developer who's willing to make guarantees and things, and maybe the developer fee is not that important. It's nice, but those are the types of things you can kind of get into as, what do you want? Obviously, management's important, but how about the development process? And that's something you can kind of think through, and we could definitely give you a lot more real-life flavor and what some of your peers have done, or what's the right answer for you. Kind of risk, it's really a risk and reward kind of thing on the developer side.
So would there be a need for the housing authority itself? Board? I mean, us versus Jamie and, yeah, sure. I mean, when you're working with Section 8, there's nobody overseeing other than,
Brown County Housing
yeah.
Authority.
Well, yes, that, yes. So that's Section 8. So with Brown County, then would there be a need of GBHA?
Well, GBHA stays.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we
Okay,
have
no, it's not
scattered
like it's, I'm gonna, miss
Yeah.
this or something like that, but I mean, I'm just.
have my vote there, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I'm just saying, is there, if we do, as Brown County already has a housing authority, and we now fall under their Section 8 program, is there a need for the Green Bay Housing Authority?
But
That's what
I
I'm
would
saying.
say to you, absolutely, yes, because we also have scattered site units.
Correct.
And we have a
That's
mission to
true.
provide
Oh, that's
affordable
true.
housing.
And-
So, just with that, how do we mesh, and this is probably way too far down the road here, but how do we mesh management under this system, the RAD system of Mason Manor with management of the scattered sites? We've got employees from the city that now do all of that. How do we mesh that together? Does that push us more towards being the developer, where we maintain management as opposed to divesting ourselves of that?
Yeah, we're definitely gonna, again, right, this tax credit equity investor is putting a lot of, they're gonna make sure that the accounting records, I'm not saying your accounting records are not, but, what is the system for allocating, if it's city staff, they're gonna really understand the allocations and so forth, because, so, no, I don't think it necessarily says it's pushing you towards, finding, the development and management can be separate. I mean, because if you wanted to bring an outside developer, one of the things you say is, management is of utmost importance to us, so that's, you can't live with that, then don't even kind of talk, your interests have to align. If going to find a developer is what you decide, there are many options that we can introduce you to many people.
I mean, in our case, and I think about this, so we go through this, and Mason Manor's, beautiful and great, and we don't need to do all these work orders, they still have 50 units of scattered site housing that are in
Yeah.
the same boat as Mason Manor right now,
Yeah.
that we're trying to figure out how to
Correct.
maintain those. So, you know, luckily our staff isn't, if it was just Mason Manor staff, that'd actually be, I think, harder than the
Right.
fact that we have all these
Yes.
other units, so our staff
Yeah.
actually could spend more time on the other scattered site units.
But does that mean we have to kind of segregate it, kind of like what was happening before with, sort of internally with your office between Brown County and Green Bay?
Right.
Now do we have to segregate it between staff spending so much time with Mason Manor and then so much time with the scattered sites? And how do you account for
So we'd have to
all that?
figure, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But our time cards already reflect that.
How do you
Yeah.
reflect that on your
Like-
time cards? What do you mean?
Like today, I'll split up, like I didn't touch too much scattered sites paperwork, so I'll do like 1 or 2 hours to scattered sites of what I did.
So you have different funding?
Right, yep.
Okay.
So your
All right.
staff is filling that
Sure.
out now.
Yes,
Okay.
we have all of our staff bills out,
So at
there's
least we'll know the
hours
difference.
worked per
Okay.
scattered sites
Gotcha.
in Mason Manor.
Okay.
And you said that because we won't take away like units from Brown County Housing Authority, so we wouldn't technically fall underneath their realm anyways. So you would always be needed because a lot of
Yeah.
times I hear that you create an LLC and that LLC has a board.
You might have his own board, so, right, it might be the same board members
Yep.
here that might be.
So we have a Green Bay Housing Authority, then we have a Mason Manor.
Manor LLC board.
Made up of the same board members.
Okay, that,
And appointed by the GBHA board,
Yeah.
the Mason Manor LLC board.
So
So
then
you
they're
appoint
well
yourselves
covered.
to, so
okay.
are they the same?
Well, okay,
see you.
yeah, that creates other legal issues of liability
Right.
and so
That's
forth.
what I was,
Yeah.
that was the other thing.
Right, so if we get all the way into this and city council asks, what kind of savings would there be to combine with the county housing authority?
Yeah, that's
What
right.
happens?
We've done actually extensive research on the combination of those housing
Right,
authorities.
recently, it
Correct.
comes up every couple of years,
And
right?
that, so, first of all, it would not ever go to city council because the GBHA is
It would
its
go to
own
the
entity.
county.
So the council would not make any determinations about this.
Okay.
I guess if they would say that, I would give them the same reasons that the county is running, managing the Section 8 program. We have our work with Mason Manor and Scottsdale. I don't see those two ways changing at all.
Okay.
That I don't believe the county has the staff to absorb what we're doing as housing authority, so they would have to just rehire
The last time we did,
staff, so.
the last time we did the
Correct.
study, it
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
clear,
Right.
Right, so I think the staffing would still need to be the
But they're,
same.
even though it's under the title of Section 8, it's actually two separate programs.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's what I was really getting at,
Mhm.
is if that's gonna be a Section 8 site, that's under the county,
Right.
or is it still gonna stay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. We can touch on the other slide.
Yeah,
Very good.
Collecting money with the-
We have these. It's a dark gray.
Rolls Royce, big one, straight A.
So I know we've been talking about Mason Manor, but we'll just maybe spend a minute just on what it means. We've talked about Mason Manor. We're just gonna talk briefly about scattered site, just a second. So, yeah.
Yeah, so HUD, I think it was last year, came out with this notice 2018-04. There's a number of provisions in it, but two that could potentially apply to you are, HUD says that if you have units that are 4 units or less, you can exit the public housing program and enter into the Section 8 program by getting tenant replacement vouchers. But there's some caveats with that, like, you know, if you've got 3 duplexes in a row, they're like, well, that's kind of more like 6 units rather than 2, 2, and 2. But they also said that if you are a small housing authority of 50 units or less, you can exit out. So if you went through the RAD process with Mason Manor and you get through that entire process and you fully convert all of those units to Section 8, you are now considered a small housing authority because you only have 50 public housing units left, and you could choose to dispo out, they call it, of the public housing program, and again, back to having, you know, a slow incline of rents rather than up and down on those 50 scattered site units as well. So on this slide, I just show the same as before with the 2018 RAD rents of what a 2, 3, and 4 bedroom would be, plus the 2019 OCAP adjustment, just for illustration purposes.
50 units.
We have exactly 50
Exactly,
units.
yeah.
So you're saying that if we chose to go Section 8 with them, we would be considered a small?
So if you, if you did the RAD conversion for Mason Manor,
Right.
then you only have 50 public housing
Oh,
units
Now we have
left.
204.
Correct,
Or
so
204.
putting them
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Take
so
Mason
now
Manor
we're just
out of the mix.
50, okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
eligible, yeah. So it's just something to think about in the back of your mind.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know if those units also need rehab or, you know, what the situation is with
Always in
those.
need- always in
They
need of
did that
rehab.
remodels,
Yeah.
about
Sure.
10 years ago maybe, so
Yeah,
now we're on
sure.
round 2 of having to replace everything.
But your due diligence on 50 scattered sites versus one.
Yeah.
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 Right.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Any other questions?
I think, you know, again, in summary, there's a lot of information. I know some of you have heard it and seen it, but it is, and, you know, again, the program's been around 6-7 years. A number of, you know, your peers in Wisconsin, obviously many other states have done it. I think, you know, trying to be purely objective, you know, we don't get paid by HUD or anything like that. It seems to accomplish what HUD wants, right? It's, again, I can't, you know, knowing your future funding levels and then you can access tax credits right now as public housing, but as Caitlin alluded to, it's not easy. You gotta go through demo dispo and this is big mixed finance. Converting allows you much easier access to tax credits and debt and home funds and things like that would be eligible as public housing.
Yes.
Can I just ask one question before we do that?
Yes.
So you're saying that okay, so let me get, we converted Mason Manor over to Section 8. We always had like a little piece of capital in there. So 20 years, we're gonna need some capital improvements in there somewhere. Is that a piece of what we still get from Section 8, and then we just put that aside for capital? Or where do we get our capital
Yeah.
funds for any?
So what we'll do, right, that's a great question. So what happens in these tax credit deals, right? So first of all, we're gonna address everything, you know, even though like you get this capital needs and they say, well, in 10 years you need to do this.
Correct.
We're probably gonna say we're gonna do that today. Because we're gonna get, you know, as much money as we can today to address the long, so that's A, we're getting.
Okay, gotcha.
But B, we're also, you probably heard a concept like a replacement reserve. So all your WIDA and all these people are gonna say, we're gonna have you put away $300 per unit per year
That's what I was wondering.
so we'll reserve for
Something
future.
happens that we actually look at.
You have, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I was like, where is that, where
Yeah.
are those funds coming from?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll budget for
All
that.
right.
So if we do get all that money up front and then, you know, we're kind of spread it out, do we run into any arbitrage issues?
No, I mean, because, you know, again, it almost seems, right, it almost seems too good to be true, right?
Right,
It's kind of question.
that's where we started from the
No, I mean,
last time. we did.
no, it's competitive, but no, this tax credit equity, as Caitlin said, they're only in it, it's really a tax motivated play by banks and insurance companies. There's no cash needed, there's no interest rates, it's not, you know, it's not free, but you're making guarantees, so I can say, it's like free money, there's no,
So no interest?
There's no, on this $7.9 million, it's equity.
Well, yeah.
That they don't need to be repaid, because they're getting all they look at it, you know, if you think of, they're getting these, tax credit is as good as $1 of cash, because we all owe taxes, this tax credit actually reduces your tax liability by $1, so it's really $1. So they just look at you know, what kind of tax credit, and then these tax losses are coming to them over 15 years. In today's market, they want over a 15-year period, like about a 5% rate of return. It's kind of 4.75 to 5.25. It's kind of the market on a time value of money, present value kind of thing. So it's all via tax benefits. It is almost too good to be true.
I'm looking at this slide on sheet 7, number 7, and it looks to me like HUD's finding a comfort level with the risk involved. That doesn't mean they're comfortable yet, because they're still calculating some risk here. There's less than they were in 2012, but it's still risk. Do we need this immediately?
Do we need RAD?
Yeah, like, if this goes away in its entirety and HUD says, you know what, this works after a 10-year span, or whatever discussion, possible elimination of capital. I mean, like, they have to be studying this risk somehow, that they've got this parabola affiliated with it.
I think as a board, we are going to need to grapple with how to make some very expensive improvements to this.
Correct. Yep.
Bottom line, whether it's this program or if we go out and financing our own somehow system.
Well, not to interrupt, but I am, not only improvements, but just expensive maintenance things.
Well, and I guess that's what I'm thinking, you
Yeah.
know, things like that generator.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
huge,
elevators.
the roof, the elevator work.
Yeah.
And that's not even the stuff that really improves the quality of life of the tenant space.
Right.
It's a basic structure.
I think you're probably right, and we can't afford it, but I'd like to know that for real, and not just on speculation. And I think that's part of the
The
flow
needs
chart.
for Mason
Yeah.
and Brentwood.
So, I mean, that's
Well, I'd be
like,
happy to do that capital needs for you.
well, right, like, how far can we get into this before we can back out? Right, and how much work do we actually need? And what do we want it to be, and how do we pay for that, right? Like, all that stuff has to happen no matter what, red or otherwise. We have to start finding a path for it.
Does money come out of the Green Bay Housing Authority for this project?
Probably
If we
the
wanna
capital
invest.
needs assessment is funded by the housing authority?
Yeah, probably
I would
just,
think.
yeah, those
Like
types
capital
of,
needs
yeah,
assessment.
right. Once, yeah, that would be, right for now, for the next, you know, yeah, and then if you do apply for tax credits, you know, you, like, a capital needs study, so what WEDA needs is a capital needs study, you actually need an appraisal, a market study, so it could be $15,000 to $20,000 of kind of out of
Cost for
pocket
that.
to apply for the, if you do get a development partner, sometimes those are costs, you can split with the development partner, but that ballpark, $20,000, $30,000, give or take.
So maybe
Yeah,
what we
it's-
should do is look at, since we want to do a capital needs assessment anyway, we should get that on paper and have professionals do that. And we could make that application with the 2-page application to get on the list at least for, we could maybe start that process. Knowing that if we get that capital needs assessment, at that point the board can go, okay, these are our needs. We really need to consider actually following through with
What are our
this,
options
or,
for bridging this gap?
right?
I think for the most part, I think we have a good sense of what the needs are, you know.
You know what, though, it's
Having it on paper.
It's
we
good
need
to have it professionally done on
Yes.
paper, so we know exactly what we're talking about.
Until somebody looks at it and with an expert eye,
Yep.
you're not gonna know, you may see the surface rust, you don't see the failures underneath it,
Yeah.
until somebody
Yeah.
looks around and looks at it and knows what they're looking for. Any other questions from staff or from commissioners?
I you know, just what caused me to pause a bit was that we're not owning the building. That seems kind of, you know, And then, if I understand correctly, Brad has some influence on the staffing or the, how do you know, policies, procedures, things, and I'm wondering, will the staff still have the say with regard to everything that's, you know, within that building? Policies, procedures, that type of thing?
The particulars of the 150-page partnership.
Yeah.
And I think it's how we choose to be the developer.
Developer,
I was
yeah.
just gonna
That's, yeah.
say
In
that.
that situation, because I think regardless, you would have the regs from the program, the
Right.
project-based voucher regs you'd have to follow, which sounds like we pretty much follow those now anyway.
Yeah.
But we would just have to, I mean, that'd be something, our due diligence would be,
Okay.
and how we set this up to make sure that
Mhm.
we have the staffing we want in place, the
Mhm.
number we need, whatever that is, and we're able to run it in the way we want to.
Yeah, and then, you know, then you, even in kind of what that budgeted, you know, again, as Caitlin noted, we sized a $200,000 loan. Depending on where you, obviously, we know what the rad rents would be. We know, well, that's where we have to figure out what your operating budget is, right?
Right.
And maybe your operating budget is, you know, much closer to your rad rents, and there's no, I mean, maybe that is zero, you know, all those, you know, it's kind of like, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, right? How you're gonna operate is gonna affect what kind of cash flow there is, what size is the debt, which do I need other sources, so it's really kind of all together.
You know, I could see us, as a result of this, eliminating our contract labor. Like, I feel like we've got some contract labor for painting and some other things that we may not need that contract labor anymore as a result of this conversion, but,
And why wouldn't you?
well, I'm just thinking that depending on how everything's new, painted and fresh, for a while anyway, like our staff could keep up with that.
It'd buy you
Oh,
time.
So we'd have,
So it would just
we
be
don't-
per unit as people move in.
so that might be something that might change. I mean, I
Yeah, the
think.
flip side of that is you replace these systems, head towards these buildings, a 15-year lease, and then
Mhm.
you're 3 or 4 years out from having to change out all the air units and
Right.
the
Mhm.
roof fan. You know what I
Right.
mean, like
Yep.
especially depending on how the developer agreement works out, and they're picking those parts and pieces, and you're gonna
Mhm.
get parts and pieces that last 15 years in one day.
Yeah, right.
And that's,
What?
no,
Is that how it works?
no, they're super honest folks. It's all good.
Yes, we definitely would have to go into it eyes wide open.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, like, once you're in, right?
Mhm.
I'm familiar with the Federal Home Loan Bank, and,
Yeah.
you know, those agreements are, well, ours was like $400,000, and after 15 years, it's gone.
Mhm.
You know, it just, so if there, you know, if we had funding that was the same way
Mhm.
across the board, that, okay, as long as you don't turn this into Bert's Bar and Grill,
Right. You're running like you say you're gonna run. it.
yes,
Well, you
then
comply
we'll
with
forgive it
the
after
You
15
can
years.
price it right.
You know, versus we own the building for how many years?
15.
15, you know, that's the part, that's why it throws me,
Right.
you know, the ownership versus the, you do what you need to do within the guidelines, and then it's forgiven.
Well, we're
But-
still we're
still
selling it
the
to ourselves
managers, yeah.
and other people. So the
Okay.
housing authority still is the managing partner
Yeah,
and the
Okay.
ownership structure.
right.
So we're not completely out of it,
Okay,
is my understanding.
Absolutely correct, absolutely correct.
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
that was my concern, was like.
Any,
Yeah.
okay, so, any other questions from anybody before we open the floor? All right, is there a motion to
I'll
open?
make that motion.
A motion, is there a second?
second.
Motion and a second. To open the floor, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. If you want to speak, please just kind of step forward and state your name and address, and
You don't need to step forward,
just,
just.
well,
But you can if you want.
and if you want. Go ahead. ma'am. And what's your name first?
Oh, I'm Anita Tony. I live in 406, and I'm a floor leader for the 4th floor.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mesa Manor.
And, yeah, Mason Manor.
It's all right.
It's a public meeting, it's being taped, that's why we just want, if somebody's
Oh,
watching it,
right.
we kind of.
The question I have is, got confused, I'm not a board member, but on the land lease, if you're leasing it out, who are you leasing it? Is Mason Manor leasing it to somebody else, or is somebody else leasing it back to Mason Manor? I was lost
Sure,
on that.
Sure. So really, the Green Bay Housing Authority actually leases the land to this new entity that's created to bring in, you know, the tax credit equity. So we'll call it Mason Manor, you know, LLC is the one that's, you know, buying the building, not the land, the building, renovating the building for 15 years. And so the Green Bay Housing Authority leases the land for this 15-year period.
So that would be a funding source for Mason Manor, getting that income from leasing it?
So the housing authority is actually Mason Manor actually pays, and it's usually nominal. I mean, you know, $10, $10 a year. So it's really more, just so more of the housing authority controls. Exactly.
It's kind of a means to make sure that we maintain ownership of the
Yeah.
land.
So it's not really
And then you
fair,
still
so-
have the 1% of the building
Yeah.
that they,
Yeah.
at 15 years.
Exactly, yeah.
And then one other question, then I'll be quiet. What does PHA mean?
Public housing
Public housing
authority.
authority.
Just housing authority.
That was
public
too
housing
easy.
authority. Keep it easy.
Hey, that's probably the easiest question you got.
Exactly.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Good question.
Anybody else? Ma'am, go ahead.
Mine isn't actually a question, I just want to...
What's your name?
Oh, I'm Mary Borowitz, I'm 6th floor leader in
Okay,
Mason
thank
Manor.
you.
I just want to share with you, you know, the apartments are, you know, in quite good shape, but, you know, there's things that you can just tell down the road are going to be coming, you know. In my room, especially up at the ceiling, you know, where the wall and ceiling meet, it's cracking, big cracks, and that happens a couple times a year. I keep filling and everything, you know. And like, you know, the rugs that are put in they're indoor, outdoor, really thin, and if you're in there a long time, you know, it's like 10 years before they can be replaced, but if you're moving around a lot, vacuuming a lot and everything, there's just so many things like that in the apartment that are,
Even in the apartments themselves.
yeah,
not
because,
just
we're talking a lot about the other, but I just want
roads,
to tell you,
generator,
I've been
apartment
there
stuff,
4
yeah.
years now, and, it's lovely. In fact, it's better than apartments I've ever lived in.
Mhm.
But it's just that you can see, and then, for people that are handicapped or have a lot of scooters, things like that, the layout isn't right for that.
Right.
So in the shower isn't right for it and everything. Even if you're a person that's got more weight, the
Right.
shower isn't right. It's so narrow and with a door. There's just so many things like that just don't function right. So I just want to put that out there.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions? Is there entertain a motion to close the floor?
Go ahead.
I'll make that
We have
motion.
a motion, is there a second?
Geez, can I second it?
You can second it. I will let you second it. Thanks. So there's a motion and a second to close the floor. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Anything
So you
further
just-
for the folks from Baker Tilly?
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
No, and I think I gave most of you all my business card. If I haven't, I can give someone else.
Thank you.
And please feel free, Caitlin and I, we've been doing this, I've been doing this a really long time, I'm much older than Caitlin, but, we're very, passionate about providing just good information so you can make the choices that your housing authority needs to make. So, any questions that pop up, I'm sure Cheryl will be, contacting us anytime.
And thank you for
I'm
making the
sure.
drive.
Yes, thank you.
Sure, sounds good, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Moving on, next item on the agenda.
Their decision then?
Back it up.
I'm wondering if it's possible for us to at least maybe start our due diligence with working on the capital needs assessment. If the board would-
Good idea.
If we could start looking at that. That might take us a little time to do that.
I will make a motion to do that. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? And I think it's something we need to do anyway.
Right.
All right, no further questions. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. None of them have been voted.
Yes, please.
Everything.
Whoops.
Yeah. Okay, do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
I mean, online, so.
What is your?
Where are
To
we
do a
going
needs,
now?
capital needs assessment? I don't know.
Yes.
It will pop up when
Pop
Tom
up, give me a
finishes it.
second.
Okay.
Because those aren't action.
We went
items.
through a capital needs assessment of shelter, did a, I think, 5-year plan.
What it says on here is a little different than what we're actually voting on.
Todd, you have to retype
There you
it.
go.
No.
Or do you go back in the minutes when you?
It's on the item, but it might be a agenda thing, so we'll just fix it later.
Yeah.
We will vote for current item, review and possible action regarding presentation by Donald Berners of Baker Tilly regarding rental assistance demonstration.
Yep, that's the right one. But then we'll add the motion
The
in
motion will
later.
be to
Yep,
allow
Motion
staff
will be
to
to
be
allow
on
staff to
capital
be in
needs
capital.
assessment.
Yep.
Okay, everybody understand? Everybody vote.
Sorry. Did that already. Did that, done that.
Okay.
Well, I'm real slow in the head.
No, it's okay.
You
I
got
didn't
the
even read
plan.
it, I just saw it. Yeah, I do have it on here. It's
okay,
great.
motion approved.
It's at capacity, it's just.
So anything further that you need on this?
No,
Right. And, all right, moving on, next item on the agenda. Consideration with possible action on election of officers.
Okay.
So,
So Bill.
How about we
Bill
consider keeping the same ones we have right
chair
now?
as our past chair.
yeah.
Are there any nominations for a chair?
Bill.
David.
Bill
Any
DeCastle.
nomination? Is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second it.
Does Bill accept that?
I accept.
Yay!
Unless somebody else,
Are there any other
Absolutely
nominations?
not.
if somebody
Are
else
there
has
any
got
other
a great,
nominations?
Any other nominations?
One more time,
Board.
3 times I've asked.
all right.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
forgot. I got
So,
the-
can we we'll just do a voice vote on that, Todd?
Well,
I believe we have to vote, because it's
Yes.
under the,
But do we want to do it as one motion?
Yeah.
For all.
Yeah, for all of it.
For all of
Okay.
them?
Yeah.
Okay. Who is current vice chair?
Current vice chairs.
Is it me?
That's
Okay.
you.
All right, I nominate Terry.
Well,
Oh.
but you're just getting into it.
You
don't have
chair
a full year.
Yeah,
You were vice chair.
Yeah.
You don't have a full year
I've been
yet.
in and out of vice chairing for a very long time.
Well, see?
Yeah. So
Well,
now
all
it's
the
your
more
turn.
reason.
Is there anyone else?
Don't even look at me like that.
Yeah.
We're all looking at you.
I just need a second for Terry's.
Who's our secretary?
Yeah,
Oh,
Cheryl.
Cheryl.
Like the
Just-
director,
just
Yeah.
full
chair and vice
secretary
chair.
position,
Right.
Yep.
by statute. Or
Terry, would you accept that
Crap, look at
nomination for
officer
vice chair?
spots.
Yeah.
Forget about it.
Yeah.
Terry,
Just create a new one.
Terry said
There's
she would
really
accept
not
that
mine.
nomination.
Okay.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? All right.
Yeah.
That makes
So we
sense.
have Terry and me, or Terry and I.
Yeah,
And you need a second?
Second for that?
for Terry, yes, you do.
Yes.
I did that.
I'll make that second.
Okay.
Second, Terry.
Thank you, Sandy.
So the motion that you need to vote on would be the approval of Bill, Anna Panslow as the chair, and Terry Rucker as the vice chair. Right.
Yes.
And do you want to vote on your voice vote?
It would be on here, just because
Okay.
it's under the regular business, so then they said those
Okay.
have to be on the tablet.
Okay.
Look at the tablet. Look at the tablet.
We're all staring at a tablet.
Jeez.
Should probably.
There we go.
It's just, I didn't read
Yes,
it.
yes.
Yes.
Okay,
All right, thank you all.
Everybody do that. Yes.
As we head down the Rad Road.
Terry's like,
The
no.
road of Brad, yeah.
All right, moving on, to item number 3, consideration of possible action on purchase of leased snow removal equipment.
Didn't we vote on that
Yeah.
a couple
I
months
thought we
ago?
did too.
That was to lease it, now we're to purchase it.
Why?
Oh, so we have these
David.
stuff that we are looking at purchasing.
And that was in the original thing, that it was a lease to purchase. We would like to move ahead with purchasing it because we do have our 2015 capital funds that are expiring very, very shortly. So this is a good way, since it is an item that we do need anyways, I can move money from the items that we currently have budgeted for and move this to spend all those dollars that are going to expire and we're going to potentially lose.
But I think we wanted to lease it for a while to see if it was going to be worth the squeeze to purchase it.
The
Which is why we went
process,
into the leasing agreement.
The right size.
Why don't you come on up?
To make sure it was the right size, we didn't know for the sidewalks, the weight.
Yeah, you like
Right.
it?
Yeah, is everything good to go?
It's made life a lot easier. Ask Jeff, he's got all the.
We'd
the
still be
time.
plowing.
It probably cuts the
Just-
time almost in half.
It cuts it in half.
Just for the record, what is it? I mean, what are we?
It's a skid steer with a pusher blade.
A land
And a bucket.
pride.
Oh, okay.
And a
Okay.
case SR.
Okay.
So
What's the
the
price on
thing
it?
is a case, the actual equipment is case, but the plow is a land pride? Is
Yeah,
that what it
that's a
is?
pusher
Okay.
blade that's square, so you can squeak
Okay.
more. We can actually push more with it than we can push with.
So then the total is 34.5? Oh, no, yeah, because we have our down payment, if we do down
Price
payments.
Yes,
34.5.
because I think that would
37.
include the 3 months that we leased it for $1,000
Yep.
a piece.
So
Okay.
lease it for $1,000.
Mm-hmm. So if we had it for 3 months, so that's our down payment is the 3,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would be using our cap funds and expending all the cap funds that we have to expend, so we won't lose any of those. Plus, we'll be using our operating money that we have had set aside for the lease amount anyways, so it's just we're paying it out instead of in the installments. We're just gonna accelerate that, get it all taken care of at once.
Yeah, I think that sounds fine.
Is there a
It was a
motion?
good year to talk about it too.
Yeah, really. I'll make a motion to approve the purchase.
Go ahead.
I'll second.
No, I don't want to.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? Otherwise, cast your ballot.
Motion approved.
Very good. All right, moving on to informational, GBHA bills.
Those are in your package, and, you know, we've all been here a long time, and unless there's any questions, everything is pretty standard.
Oh, I should have asked him to go plug my meter for me.
You'll actually be okay if we can get out of here in the next 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, good.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this.
Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Do we really need motions?
No,
These
these
are
are
No,
informational.
You're just place on file.
Place on file.
All right.
Okay.
So that was your motion, and I will second the place on file. Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying yes, or do we need to
Yeah.
vote?
Yeah, you don't have to vote on
All right. I didn't think we
Put it on
did.
file.
You don't even need to vote on that, you
Yeah.
just need to hear it.
And we're all set now. All right, next item is the GBHA financial reports. Anything to report of a significance or concern? Stephanie?
Nope.
anything you want to bring our-
2015, we're spending our money, so I will not lose it, so that is great. So, that is on there.
Okay. All right, is there a motion to accept and place on file?
I'll make the motion.
You know, you make a motion, just
All
so
right,
you
so
can
used to
accept.
it.
All right, I'm moving on.
You're doing good.
It's just
We're gonna
the
get you
civic
a-
clerk, it won't pull it up, that's all the information.
All right,
Yeah.
number 3 is the Langen report.
All right, that is in your packet as well. That just includes all of our applications that we've sent to Lincoln and to make sure that they've passed their criminal background check for the last 5 years. And then we also have 5 fraud investigations that are.
We have 5, isn't that?
Two
true?
are
5?
closed and 3 remain open.
Okay, so what 5?
That's pretty
Is that normal? I don't think I've
Average.
ever seen 5.
How about the applications, are they about what they always are, generally?
no surprises. We do a quick general CCAP before so we can kind of anticipate if they're going to be a no-go or
Sure.
move on to the past or the rental history part of it. But
Any questions? All right, since we don't need to vote on this, we'll just keep moving along. Number 4, director's report.
So I'm glad that we can move forward a little bit on our needs assessment for the building, because I know we're holding off on some major items that we need to make a decision on how we're going or how we're going. Second thing, we've been working with our resident advisory board. A number of them are here today, which is great, and we've come up with a budget for things that we're going to do at Mason Manor. So we're taking a more
Cool.
interactive role with our board members and having them maybe decide on some things, how they want to do it at Mason Manor. So that's looking fun.
Thank you for being a part of that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for coming to the
Great.
meeting today, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I've got. Talking with manager.
Way, we just
No.
spent
All right,
35 grand on
we
this
are
before.
just moving right along here. Occupancy report for February.
all right, this is also in your packet. This is from February. We haven't done the recent one, but we've had a really tough month for the Green Bay Housing Authority. March 1st, we got 12 units, unfortunately, and 3 tenants have passed away in the last month. So we've had a really tough last month, but you know, we're grinding it out and we're gonna do what we continue to do. It might be a few days over 30, but we, you know, are really getting in our units as fast as we can, using our contractors that we have right now and just pushing through. And hopefully there's no snow in sight to divert our maintenance workers, so.
So, how many do we have on the wait list? Or,
For Mason, again, this is from
Right.
February when we submitted it. At that time, we had 47 Mason Manor applicants.
we did?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we break it down by the family
Sure.
size versus scattered site. So we haven't had very many 2-bedrooms open, and that's our highest needed.
Okay.
So we do have
Yes.
97. And you can see the breakdown between Brown County and non-Brown County applicants that we have.
Oh, I see where the
Yep.
applicants are, sorry.
And then the 25 and 4-bedroom, or 3-bedroom, excuse me. And then 6 on the 4-bedroom, so.
You know, and for us, for the calls that I get, it's usually 1-bedroom accessible. So, but yeah, 2 and 3 bedrooms, and I bet you get some that need the accessibility, but not as much as in 1-bedroom.
If we go rad,
If we go rad, what?
you could make some more accessible.
Oh, okay. Because we can't do that now? Oh, that's what I was wondering. But where would we have more funds? Why would we?
Because that would be the tax process.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, mine wasn't,
Okay.
but-
Got it.
That's all I
Right.
got. You want to put it on file?
Right, thank you. So I apologize, I keep looking at my phone, my daughter-in-law went into labor. She's still in labor.
Is this grandpa first or
No,
grandpa
this is
again?
grandpa 3.
That's why they call it labor.
It's a process.
All right, let's see, item number 6, date for next meeting, March 21st.
So historically, we usually move the April meeting a week prior because of the annual or the biannual WAHA conference.
Okay.
Our next meeting's March 21st.
March
Oh, geez.
Oh, but you're talking about April meeting?
Yep.
Okay.
I will not be here for that meeting.
April
March
or March?
March 1st, or 21st.
21st, okay.
Gonna go see.
I will be studying
Grandchild.
Robert's Rules of Order.
No, they'll be fine.
Just figure out how to get into this and you're fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got
that.
All right.
Run your meetings. you'll be-
Number 7, the date for the next meeting would be April 11th, if anybody's got any issues with that.
Yep, and that's moved, we actually have a public hearing that needs to happen at that meeting as well, so.
Okay.
Are you going to be there? Because I'll need your signature.
11th, I will be here.
Okay.
I will email you a few times.
Okay, yes, keep reminding me. Stephanie can come down and drag me down here. She-
Oh, I called your office, don't I?
Yes, she knows where I am. All right, we are ready for adjournment.
I'll make that motion.
We have a
I'll
motion to
second.
adjourn, and I'm having a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Now we have to log out.
Thank you, this is a long minute.